Okay, so I'm just going to do a little quick tutorial here on how to analyze this TRX EMG data because we're getting some questions about it. Just don't want you guys taking too much time on it. So here I have one rep, or one set. You can see our 12 reps here of somebody doing a lunge. You can see that there's pretty obvious EMG on this raw channel here, and our RMS, our second channel, is what corresponds to that. We have two real EMG channels always, channel 3 and channel 4. So channel 1 and channel 2 are what you're going to be getting your data from respectively. Obviously this person did not have channel 3 on, there's nothing on it as you can see. So we're going to be looking at the RMS averages from channel 2. So rep by rep, I'm going to slide my cursor over and look for the highest peak. Now when I'm at the highest peak, I'm going to take my eyes over to this area here. It says no sampling right now, but you can see as I slide my cursor along this, I get a peak for this rep being this area here. So if I slide my cursor along, I can see that this number here reads 0.15. I would slide it along starting I guess at rep 1, 0.06, 0.10, 0.11, 0.11, 0.12, and you would go along and do each rep like that. Just jot it down in a notepad, and then you would go over and you can see I've already put those values into my chart here for peak muscle activity. I did the exact same thing for my MVC, my single max isometric contraction. So I just slid my cursor along and grabbed the peak amplitude in millivolts and wrote that down in a separate cell. So we've got all those values. That's how you do your peaks, and that shouldn't take too long. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fill out this average muscle activity category here. So the way we're going to do average is, you can see as I get my cursor down here on the x-axis, it drops a little X along all the channels. So you can see roughly where you are even though your cursor's on the x-axis. I can see roughly where the reps take place. I've got one here, here. You can see the bursts of activity. The point here isn't that there's a distinct start and end, just that you're consistent. So I'm going to go right from roughly the start of activation, click and drag, and it drags this dark band across. Once I do that, I can unclick and it'll stay there. If I click add to datapad, that's going to add some data to my datapad. So it's going to add the average for the area that I highlighted. I'm going to do the same thing, adding to my datapad as I go for all 12 reps. Now, this shouldn't take too long, but we do realize that you guys are in groups, and if you want to work in groups to analyze the data as a group, get one person to do one muscle or two muscles or whichever muscle they did, that's totally fine. Keep in mind, we do generally want you guys writing it up using your own ideas when you write it up. If you choose to analyze it as a group, that's totally fine by us. So once I've added all those to the datapad, I switch from my scope view or chart view, which is what I'm on now. So if I click that, it doesn't take me anywhere. But if I click on this datapad view here, that will take me to the datapad. Now you can see I've got 28 lines of data here. I was playing around with some of the data earlier, but my first 12 should be exactly the same. And I'm going to grab that, roughly the amount that I had. You can count that later, and I'm going to copy and paste that into Excel. Now I know it copy and pastes all the data from here, but remember we were working with a second channel, so I'm going to copy and paste that second channel data, and it looks like I grabbed too much, so I'm just going to go and delete all the rest of that. So now what I'm left with is those beginning reps, starting for my first 12 from this RMS mean, that second channel. Where to go? Oh, sorry, go back to chart view. That second channel here. So once it all went into datapad, this is where my averages are. So I copy and pasted that into Excel and got rid of that extra data I had added when I was just taking a look at it before. And now we've got our average muscle activity in here for the entirety of that rep. Now what we need to do is normalize that to our percent MVC. So if I go into this cell and I want to write a function, so I want to take the average muscle activity, being this cell, divide it by our peak EMG activity. Okay, so we've got an average cell there. If I click on that cell and go take my little plus sign on the bottom green box, you can double click there and it will always fill down to the last cell available. You can see something weird happen here. There's a divide by zero error, something that doesn't have a value. That's because when I drag a cell down, it drags down not only the cell next to it, so it's properly referencing now C6 for this cell, but you can see that it also referenced the D cell that doesn't have anything. So I'm dividing by a cell that doesn't have anything. The way we get around that is in the original cell where you wrote the formula, you're going to put two dollar signs, one before the D, meaning locking the column, and one before the 2, meaning locking the row. So now if I press enter and I do that same task where I double click and drag it down, you can see that any cell that I pick and look at the formula, it's referencing the appropriate row cell for the average muscle activity that we're looking at, but it's also referencing that absolute peak EMG from our MVC, that value, and it's not moving that no matter which cell it corresponds to in the table. So I'm going to do the exact same thing for our peak, divide it by our MVC, but before I go too much further, I'm going to add our dollar signs in front to cell lock to that MVC and drag that down. So now you can see we have our average muscle activity for every rep as a percentage, 17%, 22%, 24%, 29%, and our peak muscle activity, so how hard you were working at exactly the peak relative to your MVC. So you can see that even though the average muscle activity over every rep is hovering around 30%, your peak EMG activity is about 50% muscle activation. So that's a little quick tutorial on how you would do one of those tables. Again, that took me probably about 5 minutes. The more you do it, you get nice and quick at it, and it shouldn't take too long. You can then convert these to your graphs afterwards, but I just wanted to make sure you knew how to go from your datapad view here back to your chart view, highlight, add those. Once you have something in your datapad view, feel free to delete it if you want to go back, and then you can go highlight your next rep, let's say, as so, and then it will be back in your datapad view. So you can add and average data that way, so it's not taking you too long to do, and then you've got your Excel charts made. Thank you, and obviously let myself, Ian, or I know if you have any questions, or your TAs, but I hope that helps. Thanks.